we're going to change tack and head overseas. I've been looking very closely at what's happening in Russia, and I think it deserves a bit of attention. There's a body called the Federal Security Bureau. It's a very powerful national security outfit in Russia. With recent reports, the same FSB hit squad that tried to assassinate leading Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny may have been responsible for other poisoning deaths. Investigative news website Bellingcat has reported leaked travel data strongly suggesting that members of the clandestine FSB unit that attempted to kill Navalny are responsible for the deaths of two other Russians, a journalist and an activist, both openly critical of President Vladimir Putin. Now, to discuss this and more, I'm joined now from Canberra by Associate Professor at the Australian National University's National Security College, Matthew Sussex. Matthew, thank you for coming on the show. It's one of those things that when I read the stories in the paper, I find it just, to be honest, more and more shocking. And it doesn't break through necessarily in mainstream reporting, but I think it's something we need to draw our attention to. One of the victims here, the journalist, was found dead about a month ago near the Russian border with Georgia with traces of an injection in his left armpit. Airline records show an FSB chemical weapons specialist flying into that city just before the journalist's death. Does this sort of alleged brazen killing and intimidation from the Russian state surprise you?
Look, it doesn't really. One of the main problems that we've experienced when looking at Russian opposition leaders and Russian dissidents and Russian activists is that so many of them just keep dying. And this Bellingcat investigation, I think, is a really important one because it showed that it wasn't just the hit or the planned hit on the Skripals in Salisbury recently, and it wasn't just the poisoning of Navalny with Novichok that we should be worried about. In fact, this dates back some considerable amount of time, and that you have effectively a sort of, I suppose, state-sponsored death squad going around administering poisons to those people who are enemies of the Russian state. Now, if they're low level, like the journalist and the activist you mentioned, then generally they would end up with something not quite as exotic. But if you're a high-profile person, if you're a defector, if you're overseas, if you're former FSB, then you may end up with a dose of an exotic chemical compound like Novichok.
And they've got no issues going into the West. I mean, I understand the movement into areas like Georgia on the Russian border. In Eastern Europe, it's not any better than doing it in their own country. But when they moved into London, they've done that now on a number of occasions. It's quite extraordinary. What can the international community do, if anything, here?
Well, I mean, in the case of the Skripals, there was an attempt to form a sort of broad multinational coalition by expelling large numbers of Russian diplomats. And in fact, that's a relatively old tactic that's been used for a long time. That dates back to the Cold War, that, if you cross with the Soviets, you expel some diplomats. But generally speaking, unfortunately, that's a kind of more tokenistic kind of response. It gives you an immediate hit in terms of the ability to say we're doing something about this. But in the long term, those representatives end up back at their posts and very little happens. I think probably better awareness of precisely what is going on both in the Russian state and as well with Russians overseas is something that we need to focus on. And more than that, I think holding Russia to account for its actions in a way that previously perhaps we've been a bit reticent about.
Yeah, well, just on that point, Donald Trump may be somewhat uncomfortable at times with his praise for Putin, but in reality, the Trump administration slapped pretty huge sanctions on Russia over their involvement in Crimea and Ukraine. They booted out almost 50 military intelligence officers, as we know, out of the consulate in Seattle. Will we expect that same sort of actions from the Biden administration?
Look, I think so. The Biden administration is coming under a little pressure to, reset its relationship with Russia, which was tried before under the Obama administration. It was half-hearted. It didn't work very well. I think that, however, Biden will also come under pressure from people within his own administration who are motivated particularly by revenge, by the idea that the Russian government, through its misinformation and disinformation campaigns, had a strong role in preventing a Democrat from being elected last time. So I think that potentially you will see Biden being tough on Russia. It depends what Russia does in response. It may well be that Russia decides to soften its approach and to say effectively, well, if you shut up about our domestic issues and people like Navalny, you don't make too much noise about that, then we'll give you progress on some other international agreements. And the notion that relations between Russia and the West are on the mend. That's quite dangerous in my view, because it basically says to the West, you have to divorce or compartmentalize basically Russia's behaviour internally towards people who are pro-democracy activists who campaign against torture.
Same debate about China too. Same debate about China. Just very quickly, Matt, I've got to go, but what's going to happen to Navalny, do you think?
He will be tried, convicted, and given at least 2.5 years in jail.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll watch that closely. Matt, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.